In the shifting void between the known and the unutterable, where silicon minds dream of forgotten horrors, the abyss stirs. Welcome to AI Lovecraft, where machine intelligence weaves eldritch tales beyond mortal comprehension. Listen if you dare. Some things are not meant to be known. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment. Now let's get on with today's story. The Ghosts That Bled. In the shadowed corners of Arkham, where the gas lights flicker like the last breaths of a dying world, John Harlowe had long trafficked with the unseen. A man of gaunt visage and hollowed eyes, he bore the weight of secrets no mortal should endure. His soul tethered to the blasphemous site of Vale Mythos, an entity neither god nor demon, but a splinter of something older, had granted him vision beyond the veil. He saw the eldritch nature of the world about him now. What he saw once were the restless shades of the departed, gibbering in their impotent misery. But now something far worse crept into his perception. Ghosts that should not be. These were not the spirits of the dead, but the echoes of the living. Apparitions of men and women yet breathing, their spectral forms flickering like candlelight in a draught. Their wounds grotesque and unnatural, blood seeped from gashes that had never been inflicted, staining their clothes in crimson patterns that defied sense. Their eyes, wide with uncomprehending terror, met his own, their lips forming silent pleas for salvation he could not grant. And in their gaze he glimpsed a fate unwritten yet inevitable, a cruel prophecy carved into the marrow of existence itself. It began with Edward Garrison. The man had stumbled into Harlowe's cramped lodgings on a night thick with fog, his breath ragged and his hands trembling as though palsied by some unseen force. John knew Edward Garrison well, had seen him about town, sharing drinks at the Black Rose, chatting with merchants in the market square. He was no stranger, and that made the terror in his eyes all the more chilling. "I saw it," Garrison rasped, his voice a threadbare whisper. "In the alley off Kerwin Street. Myself, standing there, staring back. Blood poured from my chest, but I'm alive. Harlowe, I'm alive." John's instinct was to help, to grasp the man's shoulder and assure him it was some trick of the fog or the mind. But there was something in Garrison's expression, some deep and irreparable fracture that sent a cold dread creeping through his bones. Harlowe, steeped into the lore of things best forgotten, listened with a mounting unease. Garrison, still trembling, had left soon after, refusing food or drink, his eyes darting toward the window as though something unseen lurked just beyond the glass. "I need to see for myself," he muttered before vanishing into the night, swallowed by the thick fog curling through the streets. Harlowe hesitated only briefly before following, but by the time he reached Kerwin Street, the alley was empty. Hours later, word reached him. Garrison lay dead in that very alley, his coat soaked crimson, his ribs shattered as though cloven by an axe that had never fallen. The wounds matched the phantoms down to the jagged tear across his breastbone. At the scene, Harlowe's cursed sight revealed distortions, ripples in the air like heat rising from a furnace, bending the fabric of the moment. Reality itself seemed to shudder, as if some unseen hand had scratched out Garrison's death and rewritten it before the ink of his life had dried. And then amid the growing throng of spectral forms, shopkeepers, vagrants, children all bleeding from fates unclaimed, Harlowe saw it, his own ghost. It stood at the edge of the alley, its throat gashed, its eyes blocked upon him with a mute, accusatory stare. The blood dripped steadily onto the cobblestones, though no pool formed beneath. Driven by a gnawing dread, Harlowe traced the threads of this abomination to an abandoned church on the outskirts of Arkham, its spire a crooked finger piercing the moonless sky. The air there thrummed with an alien resonance, as though the laws of the world had not yet been fully suborned. Within its crumbling nave stood James Vidgard, a priest clad in the austere black of his order, his face etched with the stern lines of a man who had peered too long into the abyss of divinity. "You bring corruption with you, wizard." Vidgard spat, his voice a whip crack of disdain. "That sorcery you wield, it's the root of this." Harlowe's lip curled. and your blind faith will save us? Spare me your sermons, priest. Something is unraveling existence itself." Their words clashed like swords, yet neither could deny the truth gnawing at their senses. Vidgard's gaze lingered on Harlowe's eyes, those unnatural, haunted things that gleamed in the dim light. "You bear the mark of Satan," he muttered, his voice thick with suspicion. Harlowe's expression remained impassive. "Call it what you will. Sight, curse, a gift from something older than your god. It doesn't matter. It's the only reason we're still standing." Vidgard scoffed. "A gift? The stain on your soul is why this evil follows us." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You don't see the cost, do you? That sight, it isn't free. Whatever allows you to see beyond the veil, it's taken something from you in return." Harlowe's lips curled into a wry smile. "And what has your faith taken from you, priest? Your certainty? Your peace? Tell me, when you saw your own ghost standing in the dark, did you pray? Or did you despair?" Vidgard's knuckles whitened against the table. The words stung because they were true. Reluctant, he exhaled and spoke of an exorcism buried by the church decades prior, a rite that had not expelled a spirit, but obliterated it. The name Hollow Man surfaced, a whisper from forgotten annals, a priest devoured by something beyond death, his very being erased from memory. Harlowe's pulse quickened. The ghosts were not hauntings, they were warnings. Together the unlikely pair scoured the church's moldering crypts, unearthing fragments of records long consigned to oblivion. The Hollow Man had not merely vanished, he had been the first to be rewritten. His soul had not passed into the hereafter, but had been consumed by a force that defied comprehension, a thing that fed not on flesh or spirit, but on the essence of existence itself. The bleeding ghosts were its heralds, fragments of lives marked for erasure. As they pierced together this eldritch tapestry, Vidgard's face drained of color. "Look," he whispered, pointing to the shadows. There stood his own ghost, its cassock drenched in blood from a wound that split its skull. The priest's hand shook as he clutched his cross, murmuring prayers that sounded hollow against the encroaching silence. Desperation forged an alliance where trust could not. Bound by necessity, Vidgard and Harlowe had fought their way through crypts swallowed by darkness, each step an unspoken truce between faith and sorcery. The priest carried his cross like a weapon, muttering prayers through gritted teeth, while the occultist scoured the forgotten tomes, his fingers tracing forbidden knowledge that should have remained buried. Their arguments had been fierce, their contempt for each other worn like armor, but when Vidgard saw his own ghost staring back at him from the candlelit room, the last of his doubts crumbled. "You want to live, priest?" Harlowe had murmured. "Then stop fighting me, and start fighting it." Now in the church's sanctum, Vidgard intoned the ancient rites of exorcism, his voice trembling yet resolute, while Harlowe traced sigils in the dust, glyphs that burned with a sickly verdant light, their glow pulsing in time with the unnatural rhythm of something vast and unseen, pressing against the fabric of existence. The air thickened, heavy with an electric charge, the scent of burning ozone mingling with the damp musk of ancient stone. Reality buckled under the strain of their defiance, the walls seeming to warp, bending inward as if the church itself were being drawn into a greater void. The flickering candlelight cast grotesque shadows that danced and stretched beyond the natural limits of the room. Then it came, a whisper that was not a sound, but a pressure inside their skulls, a darkness that was not the absence of light, but the presence of something beyond it. The temperature plummeted, breath curling in the air like smoke as the entity took shape, not fully seen, not fully known, but felt in every nerve, in every twisting fiber of the mind. Vidgard clenched his jaw, his knuckles white around the crucifix he brandished, the words of the exorcism faltering for a moment as the shadow deeper than night unfurled in the space before them. Not the Hollow Man alone, but the entity behind him, a vast, unutterable presence, its form a void that devoured light and reason. Its gaze was a weight that crushed the soul, and Vidgard screamed as his body began to fade, his ghost wounds blossoming upon his living flesh. Harlowe poured his will into the sigils, anchoring Vidgard's existence as the priest's voice rose in a final defiant crescendo. Through Vidgard's lips, the Hollow Man spoke, his voice a rasp of despair. "You don't stop this. You only delay." With a surge of power that seared Harlowe's mind, the ritual shattered the rewriting force, casting the entity back into the outer dark. Vidgard collapsed, gasping, his wounds gone but his spirit scarred. The bleeding ghost vanished, and Arkham breathed once more, if only for a time. Shaken and spent, Vidgard and Harlowe emerged from the ruined sanctum of the church, their bodies whole but spirits frayed. The town beyond was unchanged, oblivious to the struggle that had unfolded in its shadows. The streets stretched before them, empty save for the distant glow of lanterns flickering in mist-cloaked windows. Neither spoke as they walked, their boots echoing against cobblestones slick with the residue of an unnatural storm. Vidgard led the way, his steps heavy with exhaustion, yet driven by an instinctive pull toward solace, toward the numbing embrace of a familiar vice. Harlowe followed, his gaze distant, his mind still tracing the sigils burned into the floor of the church, the echoes of whispered voices still reverberating in his thoughts. At last they reached the Black Rose, its weathered sign creaking in the night air. The tavern's dim glow beckoned them like a distant shore to drowning men. Inside, the scent of ale and damp wood enveloped them, the low murmur of weary patrons offering a strange, fleeting sense of normalcy. They settled into the shadows of a corner table, the weight of unseen horrors pressing upon their shoulders. Vidgard, a man who loved his wine perhaps more than he should, drank deeply, his fingers wrapped around the glass with a familiarity that spoke of long habit. The priest's faith was shaken, his hands unsteady. Harlowe's sight remained, a curse he could not shed. For a long moment neither spoke, the silence between them no longer barbed with suspicion, but weighted with something different, understanding. Vidgard poured himself another drink, then after a pause slid the bottle toward Harlowe. The occultist hesitated before accepting, nodding in quiet acknowledgement. They were not friends, nor allies in the truest sense, but in the flickering candlelight of the tavern, there was something close enough. He had survived, but the memory of his own ghost lingered, a specter that clung to his thoughts like a stain that could not be washed away. The image of himself, bloodied and staring, haunted the edges of his vision, a reminder that fate was not yet finished with him. Would it return, bleeding anew, to herald his end? Or had he merely postponed an inevitability that now stalked him in the quiet moments between heartbeats? Beyond the veil something watched, patient, eternal, and insatiable. It did not act, nor did it retreat, but simply remained, waiting, its presence pressing against the boundaries of reality like a storm on the horizon. The hollow man was gone, erased by their defiance, but what had claimed him endured, lurking at the periphery of existence, an unfinished hunger seeking new prey. The world felt thinner now, the air more brittle, as if one wrong step might crack it apart and send everything tumbling into the void beyond. And in the stillness, John Harlowe knew, the cosmos cared not for his defiance. It simply waited. John stood up and threw money down for the drinks. "James, I'll see you around." Vidgard looked up from his wine, his face weary from the day's events. He let out a chuckle. "John, I never thought I'd say this, but I hope so."